COVID. I'm Rita Riker, President of the Board of Focus Greater Syracuse, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our forum and delighted that our expert housing panelists can join us today, Kerry Quaglia, Mike Flair, and Don Radke. They will be formally introduced in just a minute. Today's forum is one in a series of forums focused on the implications of and how we're coping with COVID-19. Before we get started, just a few comments about our format. This forum is scheduled for 1 hour and we'll be recording today's session. Our panelists will each present for about 5 minutes, followed by about 15 minutes of Q&A, where we will address as many of your questions as possible, including those submitted ahead of time, and thank you for those. If you have a question for our panelists or a suggested topic for a future forum, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Board member Brian Hoke will be monitoring the Q&A. If you're having trouble using Zoom online, please try dialing in using the alternate phone number, meeting number, and password included in your invitation. It's a little bit of a process, but it does work. We have also placed that information in the chat box. Finally, we encourage you to complete a very brief survey that you will receive after this forum so that we can better understand your experience with this forum. Now, I'm very pleased to turn this over to immediate past president of Focus, Don Radke, who will serve as moderator as well as a panelist and who will introduce our other panelists. Don?
Thank you, Rita. Hope everybody's having a great morning and feeling well. We're very, very happy to have you all here and thank you all for coming. And I want to give a quick shout out to both Rita and Brian and Amy, our board and staff members, and Dee Cleese, who make all of this possible. As Rita said, I will be serving as both a panelist as well as your moderator. And I would like to first introduce Michael Flair. Mike is currently serving as Director of Community and Government Relations at Housing Visions Unlimited. It's a nonprofit affordable housing developer located in 14 cities across New York and 1 in Pennsylvania. Mike also serves on the board of directors as treasurer of the Greater Syracuse Land Bank. He is a former executive director of the Northeast Hawley Development Association. He holds a BS in business administration as well as a master's in business administrations with a focus on leadership and finance from Lemoyne College. Michael is very involved in the local community, serving on several boards and volunteering with local agencies. He brings a broad base and deep understanding of community and economic property development, having worked for many years in a variety of senior management roles in the private, profit, and government services. Michael, welcome. Kerry Quaglia is the CEO of Home Headquarters. It's a private, non-for-profit organization dedicated to promoting sustainable home ownership and neighborhood revitalization in Central New York. Kerry has more than 30 years of experience in housing, lending, and community development. During his tenure at Home Headquarters, the organization has grown into one of the largest housing and community development organizations in Central and Upstate New York, providing affordable housing products, home improvement loans, first mortgage financing, property development and planning, and education and counseling. Kerry holds a BA with honors from Syracuse University, has studied with the Masters of City Planning curriculum at the University of Pennsylvania, received a Juris Doctor degree from the College of Law at Syracuse University. Kerry was selected to participate in the inaugural class of Achieving Excellence in Community Development from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He's a member of the Bar of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and he's a licensed real estate broker in New York. I am Don Radke again, immediate past president of Focus Greater Syracuse. I've been a realtor in this community for 44 years. I have been a member of the leadership team for the Greater Syracuse Association of Realtors, the New York State Association of Realtors, and the National Association of Realtors. I've focused most of my career primarily here in Syracuse in the housing market. I also serve as chair of the City of Syracuse Landmark Preservation Board and currently serve as president of Central New York Information Services, which is the realtor-owned multiple listing service in Central New York. So with that, I would like to turn the meeting over to Mike. Mike has a presentation, and then Kerry, and then I'll follow Kerry. Mike, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us today. It's looks like it's going to be a good day and a good weekend. So As Don had mentioned, my name is Mike. I work at Housing Visions. I've been in this role for about 2 years. Previous to that, I worked as a project manager right on the ground with Housing Visions back in 2008 for a few years. So Housing Visions has been around for roughly 30 years now. We had very humble beginnings starting in the Lower University area around 1990. Our founder, Ken Craig, and a few of his colleagues attended the University United Methodist Church. And as they were leaving church one day, they had noticed some of the increase in crime and the issues with properties in the Lower University area. So they got a couple of colleagues together to try to figure out what they could do to help the neighborhood sustain itself. And what they discovered through some research was that housing was the key. It wasn't just housing, but it was housing for homeowners, housing for rentals, businesses. So they quickly developed a plan, and they tapped into a program the government had passed in 1986, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, and utilized that for most of their funding. As they started to grow on the east side, the city of Syracuse took notice of this work and asked them to try to do some of the same things on the north side of the city. Other areas of the state soon took notice in Utica, Rome, Lockport, so they quickly grew every couple of years. So as Don mentioned, right now we're in 14 cities across New York State, 1 in Pennsylvania. We roughly have around 1,500 units in those properties. 500 of those are in Syracuse, with I think about 80 being under construction at this point in time. Our main focus is 3 areas. We are the developer, we are the construction agency, and we also manage our properties once they move up. We try to partner with several groups like Home Headquarters, Catholic Charities, Peace Incorporated, to work with our tenants. The majority of our tenants are those folks that fall underneath the 60% area median income guidelines. So obviously, you know, in addition to housing, there's other issues that these folks need help with on a financial basis. So that's kind of why we work with those partners. We want to stay in our wheelhouse and let the experts that work in other areas kind of do their thing. And that's pretty much a background of Housing Visions in 3 seconds for you.
Okay, Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about how COVID has affected you?
Yeah, COVID has really been right now a game changer. As I mentioned, most of our residents are those people that are disparately most affected by COVID, being more prone to health issues, but also a lot of them have those frontline jobs that were the first to go with COVID. So for instance, our portfolio, not just in Syracuse, but company-wide, we've probably seen about a 40% hit on those that are in some type of arrears, that being rent being owed since COVID hit. And that may be folks that are subsidized. They may be paying the full share for the rent or partial, but we're down about 40%, which equates to about $380,000. Obviously, for any company, let alone a non-for-profit that really kind of works on the margins with their operating income, that's huge to us. So it's really having a impact on how we operate, how we maintain our units, but also for our tenants, because at some point the eviction moratorium is going to be lifted, and you know we've got to figure out a way, how do we navigate our company surviving, but also all these folks. You know, what's the plan for these folks that are in arrears, and how they're going to be impacted. So it's been devastating to say the least. It's kind of a controlled panic right now, but there's really a lot of work to be done between now and January 1st on what we're going to do.
Thank you. Kerry.
Yes, Don, thank you. And just let me say, I think the timing of this forum really could not have been more perfect, because there's certainly something afoot in the housing market. And that's really what I wanted to talk about a little bit today. So I thought I would sort of take a minute to check in with everybody on the housing market, but take a look at the housing market through the lens of the lines of business that we operate here at Home Headquarters. And we're a little bit different from Housing Visions because our primary mission is neighborhood revitalization through home ownership. We do have some rental units in inventory. We manage about 240 units, but our primary mission is all about home ownership. So I'll probably start then with our homeownership line of business. And one of the primary things that we do here at Home Headquarters is help first-time home buyers purchase that first home. And we usually find that these are the folks that are most at risk. They have not accumulated wealth. They don't own homes. They're looking and aspiring to own their own home. They generally have lower credit scores, and they have lower tenure on their jobs. And we typically see that as soon as the economy, the local economy starts to tank a little bit or is under pressure, that these folks sort of fall out of the housing market. But what we have seen with the pandemic is that simply has not been the case. These first-time home buyers are resilient. They want to continue to purchase their home. And we have helped just since the pandemic in the last 6 months, about 77 people purchase their own home. And these are all first-time home buyers. And I'm not going to steal Don's thunder because I know he's going to talk about how tight the housing market is. But you can imagine how difficult it was for these 77 people to purchase a home the first time in this market. So it's really been an incredible phenomenon and somewhat of a paradox. Closely related to this, I think, is our home buyer education line of business. Like everything else, we've had to completely transform that line of business. We used to rely very heavily on in-person classes. We would bring people in person for a home buyer orientation and then sign them up to our 10-hour accredited class for home buyer education. And it would all be done in person. If anything was done remotely, it was the exception, not the rule. Well, obviously, like everybody else in the world, we've had to change that. So now all of our home buyer education is remote. We're doing e-home and live virtual learning, individual counseling sessions through Teams or FaceTime or Zoom, whatever is more convenient for our customer. And we found that this works. It has increased our capacity. It's very convenient for folks, and it's actually caused more folks to want to participate in home buyer education, which is wonderful. So at this point, we think that there is no limit to the number of people who want to learn more about homeownership and participate in home buyer training. And that can only mean good things down the road. So that takes us to our home improvement lending line of business. And this really gets divided into two categories. We have emergency assistance, and then we have traditional home improvement loans. And that's for general property improvements, things like, you need roof, siding, windows, that sort of thing. And I think in the early days of COVID-19, we were completely overwhelmed by people that were calling us in crisis. People would call and they'd say they have no water, no hot water, electrical problems, you name it, these types of smaller problems that could probably be eradicated for $2,000 or so, but they were in crisis. If you remember those early days, everybody said, shelter in place, shelter in place. But it's hard to shelter in place when the place you're trying to shelter doesn't have water or doesn't have hot water. And at one point, we had 350 people on our waiting list for this type of emergency assistance. And we really didn't have many tools in the toolbox at that time. And then we started to get some tools to help these folks. As an example, NeighborWorks America stepped up with some resources. Our community foundation stepped up with some resources to help these folks that were in crisis. We then saw under the CARES Act that additional supplemental funds were provided in the Community Development Block Grant Program, and that's how we're helping these folks in crisis. And then most recently, just this week, there was an announcement by the Bank of America where they've provided $100,000 to help these folks that have COVID-related emergency type situations. The demand is still strong, but at least we have some tools to address it. With respect to those general property improvements, typically we're really swamped in the spring with people that want to get their roof done. They want to get siding done, windows replaced, that type of thing. That's our heavy season. But if you remember this spring, contractors weren't allowed to work. So pretty much none of those types of improvements got done. So essentially, even though we're just about to head into fall right now, from a home improvement perspective, this is really the spring that we're going into, right now. So what does all this mean? Just to sort of wrap this up. Well, I think a place to call home has always been important. And I'm sorry, are we still on? Okay, yes, okay.
Yeah.
A place to call home has always been important. In fact, that's why home headquarters formed 24 years ago. But since the time of the pandemic, home has even become more important. It's not just your home anymore, but it's a place that at a moment's notice, it could also be the place where you work. It could also be the place where your kids learn. And maybe, just maybe, it's the only place where you really feel completely safe during these crazy times. So, as a result, we see people trying in unprecedented numbers. Folks who don't own their home, they want to buy a home. And those who already own their home, we see them in unprecedented numbers trying to improve their home, keep it safe for their family, really for whatever lies ahead. So thanks, Don.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you. The first thing I want to do, want to speak about, is to just echo what Kerry just ended with, is the concept of home, what it means, how we're going to use it, is changing. We recently had a conference with the chief economist of the National Association of Realtors. And I think the first thing that we all have to remember is we don't know what this is going to really mean in the long haul. There's a lot of decisions being made now that may turn out to have maybe gone the other way or should have gone the other way. So I think it's very important to caution and say that this is an evolving reality. COVID has changed the game. To what degree and what specificity of that change, we don't know yet. One of the other things that I think is very important here locally in Syracuse, and most of us in this industry always speak to the moniker, all real estate is local, and that certainly is true. In Central New York, we have had a inventory shortage, a housing shortage in both sales, houses for sales, as well as apartments for several years now, and it's getting worse. Just to put the sales end in a little bit of perspective, year to date right now, we're down about 29% in total sales. That was followed of the prior year, where year to date we were down 27%. So the amount of inventory that we've had available for people who want to purchase homes is down well over 50%. There is no inventory. As a result, those people who are purchasing here locally are finding themselves in bidding wars. The whole cliche of a seller's market happens to be very, very, very true right now. Personally, I can just anecdotally tell you my own statistics. Since June 15th, when we were allowed to start showing properties in person again, I'm writing about 4.2, 4.3 purchase offers per offer that gets contracted. So if a buyer wants to buy a house, they're putting in 4 offers, maybe 5 offers on a property that they lose before they get a property. And in almost all cases, prices are above list price if list price is in any relationship to market value. So it's a very, very good time for a seller from one perspective, very, very tough time for a buyer. But as Kerry said, the demand is there. There's no question the demand is there. So far, we're seeing that first-time home buyer market hold just as steady as it was. And the issue isn't as much COVID-related problems, certainly not interest rates. Interest rates are at historic lows. It's the fact that there's no inventory. We don't know where this is going to go. We don't know where that inventory is going to come from. We know that new construction is not keeping pace. New construction is also very expensive. These are more national problems, but there's certainly in existence here. Without new inventory coming into the market, this tight market is going to continue. What that translates into right now is we've had a median price of a house in Central New York, half above, half below, It's now about 155, 156. This time last year, it was 142. Rental rates have skyrocketed over the last 6 to 7 years. So it's a very tough market. And one of the things that we're looking at from a local, state, and national perspective is this is kind of two worlds, two realities out there. One is those people who can purchase, who can move forward, and there's other people who simply cannot. They don't have a job. They can't make their daily bill. And those numbers are getting larger. They're not getting smaller. There's going to be a crisis at different levels. You heard Mike talk about the fact that, you know, from his perspective and his business model and housing visions, it's managed panic, close to a crisis. If you're a mom and pop landlord and you own a 2-family that you bought to pay for your kids' college education, and your tenant's not paying rent, what does that do? Yet at the same time, what happens when people can't pay rent? I mean, there's been a question that our industry and New York State legislators, especially with some recent legislation over the last couple of years, have been asking, and in my own personal opinion, we've not found the answer. And that question is, where are poor people to live in Central New York? It's tough. And it's something that must be addressed, must be dealt with. A couple of national statistics that I can give you. Mike referred to his situation of having about 40% delinquency rate. Nationally, right now, it's about 12%, and that's 4 times what the normal average is. We don't know yet, but there seems to be a little trend developing in what new construction in single-family homes is happening, and that is the trend that has been going on for years where the average house was getting smaller. In the last few months, those things coming onto the market are starting nationally we think it's getting a little bit bigger, reflecting what Kerry was talking about, what people want from their homes. They want to be able to have the flexibility to perform different functions, and that might be translating into a reverse direction of making bigger homes, and that's good and bad in lots of different ways. We're thinking on a national basis that a city like Chicago or New York or Los Angeles may very well lose permanent population, whereas cities like Syracuse might actually gain population. People might feel safer in a medium or smaller size city than they do in a large city. So it's a difficult situation. COVID for us as realtors in the day-to-day market showing properties, it's all about masks, gloves, sanitizers. We do show properties. We also show properties virtually. We have open houses in person, open houses virtually. Technology is playing a greater and greater role in what we do. So again, I'll just end by saying we don't really know where all this is going to go. And in my opinion, if people say this is what's going to happen in the future in housing, I'd probably turn off the channel and turn to somebody else. We're all feeling our way. It is an impact, and COVID has changed things, and we'll wait to see where that is. So with that, I'd like to turn this back over to Brian, our technical wizard. And Brian, can you field some questions?
I can. Good morning, everybody. And I'll add my thanks to the panelists and all of you who've attended. We've had questions come in from registration. Some questions come in today. If you have anything that comes up in the next few minutes, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. These are for anybody, certainly whoever feels comfortable, please take them. First off, how are the presenters revising their designs and specifications to enhance human health generally and to airborne infectious disease, if you are indeed doing so?
I'll start with just a practical when I ended. We as realtors showing properties, we're encouraged to do as much as we can virtually. Initial interviews, initial showings, open houses, we do as much as we can virtually. We can do in person, but it's, you know, when doing in-person open house, it's one party in at a time, period, end of sentence. We show a property, the guidelines demand that the owner cannot be in the property. We can bring 2 people in a property at a time. It's all masks, it's all sanitizers. And so from a day-to-day working, that's what we're doing. Going forward, it remains to be seen. Kerry or Mike?
You know,
Go
maybe
ahead,
just to
Kerry.
answer the question more broadly, we've had a green and healthy homes initiative for many, many years, and we were very focused on lead poisoning in the house and mold, radon, and then asthma triggers, such as maybe old carpeting, that type of thing. And I think what the crisis has taught us is that in addition to all those old nemesises, we're going to have to be concerned about things like whole house filtration systems, HRV systems that bring fresh air into the property. And certainly for our the new construction homes that we're building, we've incorporated those into our design.
For us, we've from a physical standpoint, Housing Visions has been ahead of the curve on that aspect. We've had a lot of green building techniques for well over 12 years now. A few of our buildings are LEED certified, and we also try to adhere with our funding sources to an aspect that's from enterprise green building standards. So a lot of our buildings from a physical standpoint are already there, but we're always looking to kind of see the technology and what's next. On a more residential piece, one of the things that I'm trying to do in my role is really get more into how do we help the individual, the family that's in the units from a health perspective. That would be looking at, some of those social determinants of health and how do we best utilize those metrics to help these folks. And that's something that we've just recognized on our end about a year ago. So we're trying to figure out different systems to put into place to help those folks out. But like Kerry said, one of the big things that I've enjoyed on a personal level from my life at Housing Visions and prior to that at NEDA was working with home headquarters and green and healthy homes. It's really, I think, been a game changer. Obviously, I think home headquarters and Housing Visions have been doing this for a while, but to have this concept for the whole community, it's just been fantastic.
Great.
Sorry, I was
Next
on mute.
question.
Yep, sorry about that.
That's all right.
A registrant notes that tenants report that code enforcement is doing no interior inspections due to COVID-19 and asks, what's the plan for protecting tenants during COVID-19?
I wish we had somebody from the city of Syracuse here. I can't answer that. I don't know, Kerry or Mike, do you have any insight into that?
No, I know it's for our units, it was tough because initially we weren't doing anything in our units except turnovers for a vacant unit. And if there was an issue with an occupied unit, it had to be an emergency based. So now we are going and doing regular day-to-day maintenance, but as far as the codes in the city, that's unfortunately, I can't answer that one.
And it is right now, and I know the mayor's changing this, but right now it's a complaint-oriented system. So if somebody really had a safety concern and registered a complaint with codes, you'd certainly get a code enforcement officer over there.
Okay, thank you, Kerry.
Gotcha. Thank you, gentlemen. Another registrant asks, what impact will compliance with the 2020 New York State Unified Energy and Building Code have on housing in Syracuse in regards to landlords and tenants?
Kerry, Mike, that'll be in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, certainly the new building codes will certainly make homes safer. And in this environment, we're all in favor of that. I think the only backlash that we have seen is that it also could make housing more expensive, but it's probably a cost that we've all got to incur because really safety comes first. So it will make homes safer. It might increase the price of both houses on the market or new construction, and then also make rents just a bit more pricey.
We have another question about payback of deferred monthly payments. Single sum, doubled up on future payments, immediate eviction if not paid up by some certain time. Anybody care to speak to that?
Before Kerry and Mike chime in, I'll say that as a realtor out in the community, it's interesting how many times we get asked that kind of question. And our first answer is that's going to be determined by law and an individual owner. That said, there's a fear factor out there that is real. There's a fear factor out there that is going to be a very, very difficult thing to do. I don't know, Mike, you've got a 40% delinquency rate. What are you guys going to do? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, we just started really taking a deeper dive in that yesterday, actually. As you'd mentioned, it's really going to be up to law and individual owners. In our case, what we're trying to do is we're in the midst of developing, this is one of my projects, a rental eviction prevention program through a couple of grants that we've received where we will offer tenants loan assistance, and they'll pay back just a portion of that loan. The challenge is again, that's going to take several tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, if you want to go across the whole portfolio. The other challenge is if you've got people that are on the low end of the earning scale and they're $1,000 or more in arrears to rent, how are they going to afford to pay back funding if they are having trouble just paying the normal rent during normal times? So it's one of those things where there's got to be some type of balance from the government and municipality. And it was mentioned earlier by Kerry with the building code things. Again, it's some of those unintended consequences, and really how do we balance out the need for the owner, the landlord, and the tenant. You've mentioned earlier too, Don, about those small time landlords. You've got a person who maybe is retired and has a 10-unit building that really relies on that building for their retirement income, and now nobody's paying rent. Even if they get to a point where they can evict people, that's still several months process, and they're still not making any income. So again, if we're going to have the state step in regards to the evictions and assistance, how do we help the landlords? Because I think everybody's going to be affected, especially when if they lift the evictions, it's going to be all at one time. Is there a way to do some kind of phased in approach? But I think it's going to take some kind of government assistance to an extent to really help everybody out at the end of the day.
The only other thing I'd like to add to what Don and Mike have already said is, yes, this is certainly a case where we have a rental situation, but frankly, it's also a case where somebody has a mortgage. Because headquarters has financed many first-time home buyers who now have a mortgage with us. We've seen somewhere around 80 people that have requested what's called forbearance. And by law, we had to make these arrangements with folks that had a COVID crisis. So what we've done is initially we extended their mortgage payments 3 months and then 6 months. So we would put those payments on the end of the loan and forbear those payments during the current months. The challenge with that is that taxes, right, they continue to accumulate. So to the extent that we have these folks escrowed, even though their mortgage payment, which was principal and interest, we could have forbearance on, they still have to pay their taxes into the escrow. And what we found is that some people are financially able to do that and others are not. And there will come a day of reckoning with that as well.
A somewhat related question about the size, the heft of the issue as concerns renters. Just how large is the default concern for renters? How many people face eviction, and what is being done by government and others to support them?
Well, I think Kerry and Mike already answered that to the degree that we know. I will say that from a private perspective, the National Association of Realtors is looking at a national level who we can partner with. We're talking with the Mortgage Bankers Association nationally and seeing if, in fact, we can be a catalyst and put some money on the table with some of the other partners, some of the other lenders, some of the other banks. I don't know where that's going to go. I'm on a panel that we're discussing that. Everybody thinks that some of these trade associations and banks have all the money in the world. In some cases that's true, in a lot of cases it's not. So there's limits. But as Mike said and Kerry both said, it's something that is developing. People are trying to find ways to work this through. I'm just not aware of any. There is no silver bullet. I mean, that's just the bottom line.
Mike, Kerry, anybody care to chime in, or next question?
Yeah, no, like I said, we're at about 40%. Obviously some of those people are at a very low threshold, but it could be as high as 40%.
Yeah.
Here's a question that came in live via the Q&A feature. Participant asks to hear the panelists' take on the Syracuse.com article that just came out, saying that Syracuse is in the top 10 up-and-coming housing markets, according to Zillow, and asks if you could talk a little about how gentrification is impacting our community.
I'll try that. It was interesting when that article came out. We as realtors have a mixed relationship with Zillow. They're a competitor, yet at the same time they're a provider. And as soon as Zillow did that study, one of the officers of Zillow reached out to us because we're friends and told us that we're coming in at number 9. And that kind of reflects a little bit about what I was talking about, where we might see a migration from big cities to cities like Syracuse. But I'll go back to how I started. COVID has impacted things. That said, things were pretty much where they are from a purchase point of view before COVID. There's a scarcity of inventory. So when you talk about a scarcity of inventory, you have more people obviously wanting to buy than there is inventory. So when you translate that into gentrification, be it here in Syracuse or elsewhere, I think the answer to that is there will be continuing gentrification, as there has been. Gentrification itself is a term that I think needs to be defined. There's gentrification that historically, some of it has been insensitive to communities and where they occur. In other situations, it's been a lot more sensitive and a lot more of a collaboration with that community. We'll see where that goes, but I do think personally the pressure is going to be in the sense that that's going to continue to happen.
I guess I would just chime in and certainly agree with some of what Don has said, but I would argue that they say the market in Syracuse is up and coming. I would argue it's already here, at least, that's in our experience. With respect to the gentrification issue, I've been involved in housing in central New York for about 35 years. And for 35 years, I've heard talk of gentrification. And I think a lot of it is that people maybe just don't understand really what that's about. Syracuse, for the longest time, has been an incredibly depressed market, both in sales prices and in rents. Now, what we've all seen is over the last 5 or 6 years, that has changed. But we didn't participate in the run-ups in values and rents like the rest of the country did. So we're in central New York and Syracuse in particular, we're sort of making up for lost time. So I do believe there's still affordable housing in just about every neighborhood in Syracuse. The challenge is that our prices have gone up somewhat exponentially over the last 5 years because they had been so depressed for such a long period of time. So it's not really gentrification forces that are resulting in those increases, just that the market more or less had to catch up. And I think that one of the solutions is that whenever you do any type of housing project, there needs to be some provision made that there will be an affordable housing component so that we can have affordable housing throughout the community.
Right. And just to put a number on what Kerry just said, as I said earlier, our median price is now the mid 150s. The national median price is $262.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Another attendee notes that there's a lot of housing stock pent up by older adults wanting to downsize with nowhere to go locally. and asks, are smaller one-level residential properties becoming available, being built, and being advertised widely?
I'll answer that no, and I've been on that same soapbox for years. Lots of reasons why it's not happening, primarily cost of development, cost of construction, but the answer is, to any large scale that I'm aware of, the answer is no, and I believe there is an unbelievable untapped market, and something that our industry needs to figure out, all of us.
Would you expect that to change in the near or distant future?
I'm an optimist, so I'm going to say yes.
Mike, Kerry, care to chime in on that?
Yeah, sure. I'd certainly agree with everything that Don said there. Our challenge is, and again, it's somewhat related to the relatively poor housing values that we have still, even though there's been a run up in the market. We would love to build more ranch-style homes that had downstairs living to accommodate seniors that are downsizing. The challenge is, particularly if you build those homes in the city of Syracuse, there is a gap between the construction costs and then what the house can sell for. We have to figure out how to bridge that gap in order to do this to any kind of scale.
Thank you. We had a couple questions regarding Blueprint 15. Anybody care to comment on how that relates to the situation in which we find ourselves now?
Kerry, Mike, do you have any firsthand experience with Blueprint 15? Those folks are really involved in trying to rewrite, redo the public housing realities in our community.
Yeah, we Housing Visions haven't directly been involved, but I do know one of the things that is a great opportunity is once that program gets off the ground, hopefully we can work in ancillary neighborhoods nearby and kind of build off that success. That's been part of one of our keys to revitalize neighborhoods. Is kind of building off success. So obviously we'd want to continue that threshold and build up those neighborhoods that are surrounding the Blueprint 15 area.
And I think it's certainly a once in a generation opportunity for this community. So that's the great news, right? Sort of helping people trade up as far as their housing is always a great thing. The only downside of that is that will of course put even more pressure on a market that's very tight right now. So we're going to have to work, and Don made this point earlier, we have to be optimistic and we have to work on the supply of housing and particularly affordable housing in this community.
Good, thank you. We have a question that came in from a board member who notes that with a future, asks that with a future of limited natural resources, how can our national economy be based on new housing starts? Are there trends in upgrading and improving the vast inventory of existing housing in our cities?
Yeah, I can take that one to start if you want. I mean, that's something that we try to do. The challenge is just the cost. I mean, it's much more expensive to do a rehab. We find the benefits. We try to quantify them because for a neighborhood, the aesthetics are much stronger. It's a much better green process with rehabbing a property. But again, on our end, it's just the economics. Our original methodology at Housing Visions was scattered sites. We'd go into an area, maybe 2-block stretch of Syracuse, and we might buy up 15, 16 properties, and most of them would be either vacant or rehabs, and it worked. The challenge is in the city of Syracuse, if I do a building that's got 4 units, whether it's a rehab or new construction, it might cost me $165,000 per unit. So at the end of the day, I've got a 4-unit house that cost me $600,000 to build, and I can guarantee you that the value of that house in the city of Syracuse is not going to be $600,000. So I think that the challenge is really going to be economics.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely agree. And I don't know what the solution is. if you look at the demographics right now being driven primarily by the millennial generation, they've been in the marketplace big for a couple of years, probably going to be for the next 5 or 6. The demand in unit is going to continue to grow, and it's not going to be met just by rehabilitation. It's not going to be met by just new construction. You know, you look at what's going on around the world, and I think this country has to spend a little bit more time seeing what some of our neighbors around the world are doing here in terms of construction materials, construction techniques, land costs, land use. I think some of that can be transported here that will help. But Kerry and Mike have said very, very well that costs are costs. And I was just talking with a builder yesterday, and the fear that some builders here locally have that are still doing a little bit building is when the impact of the West Coast fires hits the lumber market, watch out. Watch out.
You know, the only thing that I'd like to maybe add to that is, you know, obviously home headquarters, most of what we do is rehabilitating existing housing. To the extent that the only unfortunate thing, or many unfortunate things that came out of COVID-19, but one of them was, I think we finally had a collaboration that had this community focused on the hazards of some existing housing with lead, asbestos, radon, that sort of thing. And that how those needed to be remediated to have healthy housing. And unfortunately, with existing housing, you do have those costs that you don't really see anything when you abate lead in a property. It makes the house safer, but it's not like you got a new roof or something that's tangible out of the property. And that's sort of just a hidden cost of trying to do rehab in this community because the housing stock is so old.
Yeah.
Kerry, we have a question since you touched on it. Participant asks, why is the focus as regards lead remediation? Why is the focus on mitigating costs for the property owner rather than protecting renters?
Well, I think it's absolutely both. And, you know, we've got new codes now in Syracuse where in the past, if a landlord had lead violations, there really wasn't, it wasn't against code. So it sort of became a public health issue, but not necessarily a code problem. But now it is a code problem, and that landlord would have to make repairs. But we're also talking about supply of housing and supply of affordable housing. So if every landlord that had problems just shut the doors, we'd have even more of a problem. So you have to have resources available to help with the remediation of those issues.
Mike, Don, care to comment on that?
No, I think Kerry was right on.
Yeah, and I know the county executive, they've stepped up. I think they've got restriction now from a county standpoint for those that are getting subsidy assistance. I think there's rules in place now that those things have to be taken care of as well. Otherwise, they'll withhold the rent.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, Brian, why don't we do one last question?
Sure. Fairly open-ended one. Asking, do we know who in our community needs housing help during coronavirus? How can we find out who needs help and how can we help them?
Well, I can tell you our phone has not stopped ringing from whether it be an existing owner who needs forbearance, a small landlord who all of a sudden has some property improvements that need to be done but is not getting rent from the tenants. And then from existing homeowners who have these emergency repairs. There are just incredible needs out there. And as we've seen additional resources come on board, as I discussed previously, we had more than enough people on waiting lists and will continue to have more than enough people on waiting lists who need that assistance.
And I'll just chime in and say that I think a real part of that answer is it's up to you and me. We're neighbors, we're friends, we're families. And it's up to each and every one of us who are capable, able to move, to check in on our neighbors, check in on our seniors, check in on our families. assist, direct resources to the degree that we can. And I think that's one thing that I've seen, at least in the neighborhoods that I've been around, that anecdotally, I've seen more of my neighbors in the last 6 months than I have in 30 years. Everybody's outside. That might change in the wintertime, and that's how I'd like to close this. I think the caution is going to be, as the snow starts flying, it's going to be so important for each and every one of us to keep our eyes open and take care of each other.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Again, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank my friends Mike and Kerry for agreeing to be on this panel. And hopefully this will be the beginning of a continued dialogue in our community, and we're certainly here to help. So with that, I would like to turn this over to our Focus Board President, Rita Riker.
Thanks, Don. And thank you to our panelists, Kerry, Mike, and Don, for sharing your expertise in this forum. Boy, lots to think about. A lot of challenges, some good highlights about the status of our community, but boy, a lot of challenges as well. If you know someone who would enjoy viewing this, or if you'd like to view part of or all of this again, we'll be posting this forum on the Focus website, focussyracuse.org. Also, please watch out for our follow-up survey that you should receive shortly. Another note, a not insignificant note, while Focus operates very efficiently on a small budget, we do have costs associated with our operations. And I would be remiss as president of the board not to mention this. We would be very grateful for a donation of 10, 25 or more to help us continue our efforts, including Focus forums such as this. Donations can easily be made on our website at focussyracuse.org. Thanks again, one and all, and I hope everyone has a great day and a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.